Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next conversation, End to End, being racist, being anti-racist. So let me start that again, because that's a very important note. End to end, being anti-racist through processes, product, people, and impact. Richard is a veteran and award-winning journalist with more than 30 years in television, film, technology, and business. Currently at MSNBC and previously with CNN Worldwide, he is the first Asian American man to anchor a daily national cable news program and a Team Emmy and Peabody winner. He is the author of the best-selling and award-winning book, Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. Welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining today. Now, joining Richard in conversation, we have Adunola Adesola, a millennial career strategist and founder of EmployeeRedefined.com. She helps high-achieving corporate professionals secure new jobs they love at companies they love. She's also a Forbes contributor where her career column on how to land a new job has been read more than 2 million times, and her expertise has been featured in the New York Times, Fast Company, Bloomberg, and other publications. Thank you both for being here. Please take it away.
So excited to be here for this amazing conversation. And Richard Lui, I'm super excited to hear your insights. And so welcome and congratulations to becoming PowerToFly's first Resident DEIB Fellow, and excited to talk about how companies can be truly anti-racist. So to start us off, could you just explain what it means to you to be anti-racist?
Hey, Adunola, and it's great to be here with PowerToFly and to everybody here on day one. And there's a lot of exciting days in front of us, right, Adunola, on these very interesting topics. And this, you've started with a question that I don't know if I know the answer, only I guess, in practice is to be inclusive and to not, if we look down into the very words of what racism is and to be against it is, I guess, and if we were to dig into where the word comes from, it has very ugly beginnings, I think, in its very idea. And so to be against the idea that because of my background, my ethnicity, what I was born with and I don't have a choice about, to be against that or look upon me in a different way that is not with equity, then that is to be different grades. And, in journalism, we're very careful when we use the word racist or anti-racist. We will use other distinctions, racially charged or racially motivated. And so in the degree of understanding what anti-racist might be, I think there's an opportunity to look at the different gradations of the way we get to, if there is the idea of this, the ultimate, not good stuff, but on the way there to say things that may be unintentional and some things that are very intentional. And in either case, we don't want to have that, right? It doesn't work for anybody.
I agree. And I mean, like you said, it is kind of hard to put a name or definition to what it looks like to be anti-racist, but I like how you give that spectrum, which I'm familiar with in the journalists, like how you guys do use different ways to identify a certain situation. And so I think you make really good points on that. And so when you think about moving us towards a place of anti-racism in the workplace, what examples maybe would you be able to provide about what it would look like to have anti-racist hiring and compensation practices?
Yeah, I think one of the parts of what we can do is to try to close this misperception gap and education gap. And the way we can do that is when it comes to processes and products and people. I'll start with processes. I mean, it's the words we use. It is the who we work with, how we work with people. And when we're thinking about processes, let me get down to something very basic in how we can be anti-racist, or the opposite of that, to be inclusive and to enjoy the difference, to find sameness. That's really important here. Really relish the differences, but not because to be different. And this, Adunola, it's because there's so many things that we will realize about our commonness through the difference. Now, how do we do that is in process. Like one idea that I'd have to understand better this idea of being anti-racist on the process side is, make a list of 3 people, for instance, that you would never see yourself hanging out with. At work, for instance, like I would never hang out with that. And then you go have lunch with them. And it's not because you're against them, it's just because you don't typically do it. And that's a way of shrinking some of the perception gaps, the cultural gaps that exist that are not necessarily racist, but can lead to the misunderstandings that will start with racial misunderstandings for racially charged statements. I think that's one process, and the way we operate is to do those everyday activities that involve more of us that are different. I have had to do that in the past when I was in business, and in journalism, we do it every day. In that, we're thrown into situations where we're talking to people that we would never talk with otherwise, right? And this, and it's very. In the beginning, I didn't realize what it was teaching me along the way, but I still have these shocking realizations as I move along about what I don't know, not in a negative way, So in the process, when you're looking at these anti-racist processes, I think there's an opportunity to be open that just because you learn something doesn't mean that you were bad. Right. To accept that learning is part of it. And one of the things, not talking about racism specifically, but a similar situation out in Ola that, you and I certainly can dig in on in our care for communities, is the idea of feminism. When I realized there was male privilege about 3 years ago, I had no idea. And at that point, I was already 4 years into my feminism declaration. And the way I understand this idea of process and learning, and that doesn't mean you're bad because you learned something, it's actually good. I always say, like, I'm a 7-year-old feminist, so I'm about this tall, but I'm learning, right? And it's okay on race that we're learning. You don't have to be right all the time, but you have to admit that I'm still learning.
Right. I think what I'm hearing from you is that openness and the willingness to know, like, I don't know everything. And
yes.
And I think when you say education, that's such a good point, because it's not always reading the textbook, but to your point, it's having the conversations, getting out of your comfort zone. And I think
exactly,
especially in the workplace, it's so easy to kind of get we feel that familiarity, right? Like we're more drawn to the person who looks like us, or who maybe went to the same environment as us, or the same industry as us, or that kind of thing. And so I think, to your point, it's really about being open to understanding people and not just attaching yourself to what's comfortable, even though that's typically the easy thing that all of us do, So I agree.
That's right. Discomfort is good. And for a lot of different reasons, we have examples I'm sure we could talk about. Yeah.
And so when you talk, because you kind of touched on this with that, like the policies and the procedures internally at work, but what do you think companies can do? Because I'm sure there's companies like, okay, I want to make sure that my employees feel safe and protected and empowered. So what do you think that organizations can do to ensure that their internal policies and corporate culture are anti-racist, or at least inclusive, and really working towards that path?
Yeah, it's so funny. I don't know what you're asking that. I can see that you already have like 10 ideas yourself. I'm like, all right, and I want to hear yours after this, but I'll throw a couple out. I think one thing, the data.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really dig in. Like, what's the real data about the way we see each other at work?
Right.
How do you and I see each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Though we are different people by our skin color, what does that mean? But I'm not saying because it means it's bad. It's just like, let's just talk about what it is. Let's just find out the numbers. So let's that's the first thing, right? Otherwise, if there's no information behind it, it's just our gut feeling, it's anecdote, right? So invest in really knowing the data. That's an important part of the answer to the question about what businesses can do better. I think a second thing we can do is we can look at our DEI programs and try to understand the value that they bring to the entire organization, and to validate that safe space that is being created, that idea of communities being different but the same, and sharing their own richness. month to month or all year long. We'll start with month to month, right? We'll start with an ERG or a BRG, and then we'll move on. And then see how those ERGs and BRGs can work together, do multi-ERG events, and consider potentially what that looks like. A third idea, invest not only in time, but in real cash in your local CBOs. Go down wherever your headquarter is, that's your space, right? If you're in city X, then go down to city X, invest in that CBO in time, like 5 hours a month. Right. Everybody, like 5 people need to spend 5 hours a month there to really understand it, and also invest in resource so that we can understand that again, that realness of where we're coming from as a business, because we all exist in certain physicalities. We'd like to think that we're not, but in reality, we all exist in certain physicalities. So those are just quick 3 ideas. How about you?
Good. Like, I think that you really hit the nail on different facets of it. One thing that I really resonate with that highlighted to me when you're speaking is like the benefits, right? Because I think that in light of everything that has happened over the last 2 years, it could be like some companies could feel like they just have to do this. But I think that it's really important for companies to understand the benefit to companies, to their employees, and to their overall business on why it matters. Like, so that it's not just like, oh, we have to do this because that's what everyone's doing now. But like, understanding the outcome and the value that you mentioned, I think is really key, so that it really has a long-term impact and that sustainability feel for it. And I like the points that you've made. And I think it also starts with organizations really genuinely caring about the employees. I think for me as a career strategist, a lot of my clients feel like they're not supported, and that's what kind of prompts them to want to look for something else. And so I think at the root of it, if organizations really start to see the people first, then all of that, the data and all of that, will be able to speak to all the steps that will help ultimately the business grow and companies to have, retainability with the people that even work there, because they feel happy, they feel supported, they feel like they can actually be a part of something, which I think, as much as we don't like to say it matters, it does matter to people. It
does. Some recent projects that I've been working on, Adunola, digs into that very question, like, will you stay longer? And how much longer will you stay? And that's important to the person that's going through their career arc, as well as the organization that is bringing them into the team. And we found answers that are, I think, heartening for those who are investing in this idea of an inclusive environment. And we're talking about months or years that a person of color might stay longer if they believe that a DEI program, an inclusive program, is good and strong. And in terms of the boardroom, we have found in our initial results that the amount of revenue that workers of color believe that it adds to or can deduct if you don't have a strong inclusive program is fairly relevant. And I'm talking about, anywhere from 5 to 10% revenue hit on average. Now, if you're running an organization and thinking about people like you and me, then you're going to say, well, if Richard and Adunola is attributing 5 to 10% of revenue on a good inclusive program, guess what? If you spend less than that, a penny on a dollar, guess what the perceived value you're giving to people like you and me to hire you? Because you and I are looking at that saying, oh, that's worth that much? Okay, I'm in, right? And that's the way we need to look at it. And these are unintended benefits of a good program, right? You should do it anyway, but there are unintended benefits. And for the most staunch critics of the idea of why this might be good, I think these sort of data points that I brought up will really underline, hey, this is great.
Right. Yes. I mean, I think what you're saying really, I'm like, oh my gosh, because I work with these employees who often have these thoughts. And so the data that you just presented, I think is so important for that to be internalized, because I think when you understand the real the real reason behind it to help people
Yes.
feel empowered and supported, then it's a
Yes.
no-brainer to invest and have those resources. So I love that. Okay, so for the public facing side, right? Because we know that companies, like, they can kind of talk the talk, but not really walk the walk. And so for the public facing side of the company, the PR, the marketing, what do you think that looks like on an anti-racist front when it comes to maybe promoting the company or attracting new people, or even just what they put out there about the company?
You know, on the PR side, first of all, you got to be what you are. And a lot of companies that I've spoken with over the last 2 years, and when we've seen, you know, at least two communities face a lot of eye-opening situations. Not that it's unique to the last 2 years, as you know, Adenola, but we've seen this like spike. And I think that the ones that have done well have admitted we don't know, and that we're ready to dig in. Okay, so that's the first point, right? But then it's the next follow-up question that I would ask. Again, I wear the journalist hat in this process is, okay, you don't know, you're ready to dig in.
Right.
What's the next step?
Right.
And I think one of the ways to communicate that you really don't know is to show them that you're intellectually curious. Now, how does a business manifest intellectual curiosity? It manifests it through an investigation of what programs or what systems or what people will help to get to the I kind of know from the I don't know.
Right.
And the way you get to the I kind of know is one thing we already mentioned, which is the idea of your CBO and getting out there, because that's your learning, right? You're going to get your people out there and they're going to learn. I think a second way is to participate in the activities that are defining what knowing is. And some of those activities are the idea of gatherings, of good and bad moments, to be there and listen and watch. It's not, listening and watching does not mean supporting, by the way, or not supporting. Listening and watching. And what does listening and watching mean? I went down to the march yesterday to listen and watch because I wanted to find out myself what this meant for my organization. You know, it doesn't mean you're supporting, because, you know, I understand the way a business construct works is that, you know, you're not necessarily a political entity, nor are you, unless you are a social activist organization. But let's say you're not created that way initially, but you might be moving that way, whatever the case may be. That's another way of participating and communicating that you're moving from the I don't know to the know. All right, those are a couple of quick thoughts. And then in terms of outside of now we want to do something, on the do side, another third thing on the moving from the I don't know to the I kind of know space is to say, I'm now going to start to read, and because I'm an NBC Universal person, sorry, Adenola, is to say, I'm going to start to read NBC BLK.
Yeah.
I'm going to start to read NBC Asian America.
Right.
I'm going to start to read NBC Latino, right? I'm going to start to just be, you know, why not soft educate, right? Dig into the stories being told about the communities that are inclusive. And that's moving from the I don't know to the I kind of know space. So those are some of the things I think you can communicate in as an organization. So that's that. And then in terms of the doing side, there's a whole bunch of other things I could dig in if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super curious because I think about some companies who just, you know, because one thing that really stands out to what you're saying is you didn't just talk about throwing dollars at charities.
Yeah, exactly. Right. that helps.
But I think that's always the go-to for a company who maybe hasn't been explicitly anti-racist. Their next knee-jerk reaction is like, let's show that we've donated this amount of money to a charity, which is amazing, right?
Yes, it is.
But I do love that you kind of go a little bit deeper as actually changing the way that you think. I mean, it goes back to what you said at the beginning, like expanding your perspectives and being open to learning and being more, just getting more information on what this what it really looks like for other people outside of the people you might surround yourself with. And so, and I was going to say, in that regard, do you think that, because, you know, in the PR marketing side, a company could easily be like, oh, we just donated $1.4 million to this organization. Do you think that on the flip side, companies should then stay actively like, you know, we're implementing these policies for our company, our employees to do XYZ, or at the senior leadership side, we're doing XYZ, or what does that look like when it comes to sharing that information in a way that's genuine and not just like, here's the Band-Aid we're putting over our.
You know, I'm no PR expert, Adenola. Right. I'll say it more from taking off the journalist hat, but being, you know, citizen Richard in that, and putting on my business hat, is that, you know, I look at businesses in what they do, not what they say.
Yes.
And so, you know, why is one organization? So, for instance, when I was in business school, the one case that they talked about all the time was the Southwest case. And why Southwest was able to do this is back, you know, this case is from the 80s, but it was looking back at why in the 80s Southwest started to do so well. It's because they did things differently. It's the way the planes took off and landed in certain places. It's how much time it took for them to turn around the planes. Why is it that the legacy carriers couldn't compete? It's because they did things in a different way. So if you're really changing when it comes to the idea of being inclusive and being anti-racist, I think the idea, if you want to be communicating to people that you are different, just like we've all known people in our family or friends that say, I've changed, I don't do that anymore. The first thing we'll ask is, well, how are you operating differently? Right? How are you operating differently? Are you cleaning the dishes every day? You know, are you arriving on time? Do you iron your clothes the day before? I mean, these are, you know, just parallels to our personal life, but how do businesses communicate that they are operating differently? And that is, I think, the way for true lookers with big eyes and binoculars, they'll know if you're not operating differently, then that may not be as good as it could be.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And I see some comments here where they were saying like the data never lies. And so being able to fall back on that data and get the insights that then inform the strategy and what that should look like, I think is really important. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to that the people who are interested, like being like as an employee for I know a lot of the listeners here, attendees here are professionals. And so being able to have that discernment and that curiosity about what the company is doing will help in terms of what you just shared about making sure that the company is not just saying they're doing something, but they're actually doing something. So doing that research and kind of looking, if you really are that person who cares about being a part of this type of company, I think that's really important to just do some due diligence so that you don't find yourself in situations where you're at that company and they're only talking and talking.
Absolutely. And the data related to the real questions, not the data related to the nice questions.
Right.
You know, the real questions are sometimes, you know, we've all been in those conversations where, well, does that group not like that group? They just not get along?
Right.
Wait, does group A? So for instance, one of the pieces of the data points we found out is that in one community of color, we asked them, there's 10 values in the world you care about. And for one community of color, after healthcare and the economy out of 10, race in the workplace was the most important. That was for one community of color. For another group, it was 10.
Wow.
That's a wide difference.
Right.
That's a real question. Like, you as a worker, where do you place race as an important issue for our economy? One group says it's number 3 out of the, you know, healthcare and the economy. The other group says it's the bottom. That's a real question. We got to ask the real questions. The other question is, well, when have you thought about a lawsuit because of your identity and background? So those are real tough questions, right?
Yeah.
And that's some of the stuff that, I've been looking into, and I think it's super important. And they're not questions you want to know, but you got to know at the same time, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, that's what's coming to mind. I think it all goes back to being comfortable with being uncomfortable as an employee, as an organization, as a DEI team, like being in the discomfort, because none of these things are comfortable, like
Yep.
even digging into the data, maybe discovering that something is wrong here. That's uncomfortable. Having to go and talk to the senior leadership and tell them that this is not okay. That's uncomfortable. And so I think that we are again hitting on some major points here. And I do want to, I feel like we can go on for another 45 because we're really diving in. But we do have one question that I'm seeing, and
Sure.
I want to make sure that I'm saying, I know you can give like a rapid fire answer too.
Sure, I will.
But so Judy Kim says, so how do you propose combating the company assumption that polls and programs will not succumb to any upper management skewed psychology in organizations? And then she goes on to say, like, I've been in too many where trend focusing on specific ethnicities, genders, or age groups for marketing and financial gain purposes completely denies the true DEI. And one or the other smaller group is deliberately excluded or used without real understanding, if not of marketing or financial value. So I think what she's getting at is how do you make sure that it actually is a genuine process and not skewed based on maybe the outcome that they want to have or what they think the result should be, which is what I'm thinking that Judy's asking.
Yeah, Adunola, that's a great question. And Judy, thank you for your question. Ask the question. Now, okay, so if you ask the question, where does the answer come from? So the specific question would be to management and to other people in the company. Do you think we're overrepresenting one group versus another? Do you think we have enough people that represent everybody in management? Do you think our products and the way we see the pictures of people with our products represent the fabric of America? Do you think we're underrepresenting some? All right, so that's an obvious question to ask, right? But do we have the data behind it to say what that outcome is? And other than making the argument in your meetings, which I'm sure, as Judy says she's been doing, how do you get past that point? Now, the problem is we don't have that, right? And I'm sorry to keep on going about the data, but that's something I've always asked, and I'm sure you have, and I guess Judy has too, is to ask that question of what professionals believe when it comes to that. So we asked, do you believe that when we're talking about DEI, we have right representations across? Do you think that we have, in the way that we use images with our products, the right representation across? Ask those questions. And look, the bottom line, let's give you the summary. The answer in the data says no. And when we go in and talk to the corner office, right? And when we go into the boardroom, we have only anecdotes. Gut feelings. If you come in and say, look, we have the data across industry in America, and they know this, by the way, hello. So let's get on board with the way we have the images with our products, the way we select the folks in our DEI teams. And look, that's just the beginning. And I know that she's asked a very large question.
Yeah, we can't get into all of it. And we are at the cutoff time because this conversation was just flowing so well. But thank you so much, Richard, for sharing that candid response and for giving us all of the details that you can think of when it comes to being less anti-racist. So glad.
Thank you, Adunola. Well, you're good. You're better than I am on air because you're right on time.
Awesome. Thank you.